Okay, author, ChatGPT. Thanks. So today's a very exciting day for those of us interested in open source AI, as OpenAI has gone ahead and released two new open source, open weight, and Apache 2.0 language models, the first of their kind from OpenAI since GPT-2. Now, truthfully, there is probably going to be so much interest around these models and some of the different ways to test them that for today's video, we're going to take an initial look at both of them. We'll run a few tests between either of them to gauge their performance both independently and then perhaps relative to one another. From what we can see right here in the introduction, the two models that have been released are GPT-OSS-120B and GPT-OSS-20B. They mention that the 120B model achieves near parity with O4 Mini on core reasoning benchmarks while running efficiently on a single 80GB GPU, while the 20 billion parameter variant of GPT-OSS delivers similar results to OpenAI O3 Mini on common benchmarks that can run on edge devices with just 16 gigabytes of memory. So initially, and my first impression here, is that these are kind of like on two different ends of the scale in terms of being able to run on consumer hardware. One perhaps not as accessible, but the other perhaps very accessible. So it is nice to see pretty much all aspects there covered. And yeah, I guess I don't have as much to say about that as I had expected I would. Something additionally to note here that is probably worthy of its own video testing these sorts of capabilities are that they mention that these models are designed to be used within agentic workflows and they tout exceptional instruction following capabilities. They specifically mention tool use like web search or Python code execution, and they also touch upon the ability to kind of customize the reasoning capabilities depending on how important they would be for the task at hand. So that is quite interesting, and again, testing these in an agentic scenario is something that will be very entertaining and interesting, especially with a web search tool, but that is probably going to be saved for a separate video so I can fully cash in on the hype. Beyond that, really kind of the last thing we'll take a peek at in this article, because aside from this, it just kind of dives pretty heavily into like the safety and threat assessment and things of that of the open models here, is just an information tidbit about the architecture and size and other parameter style things for these models. So first and foremost, something that folks will be curious about is the context length, which we can see is 128K across the board for both of these models. In this day and age, that is not like something that will blow you away, but it is a decent and satisfactory size, I suppose, could be set. Now, of course, we do see that both of these models are mixture of experts models. So essentially what that means is the total parameter count is listed right here. However, the active parameter count, or active params per token, to put it more scientifically, is listed right here. So that allows models that may look kind of intimidating size-wise at first glance to actually be things that can be run on more constrained and edge hardware, such as how this little guy right here can actually run on 16 gigs and like edge use cases. So that is just something of note where MOE seems to be fairly commonly represented in open source releases these days, and that is perfectly fine as it allows these to be run on perhaps hardware that otherwise would have been more difficult. The rest of this article really just kind of goes into some evaluations and then, like as I had said, safety and threat assessment and things like that. So truthfully, we are just going to take a quick peek at the Hugging Face model card. I do actually already have both of these downloaded and set up through Ollama, and I will be using OpenWebUI as the front end in with which to test them. So we can see right here, this was my initial hello message to the 120B variant here. But something I do want to specifically make note of based on this Hugging Face model card, and something that I'm quite satisfied and happy to see, is that they do give us a decently interesting and accessible amount of information on running these with a bunch of different methodologies. So first and foremost, they have examples for running it with transformers. Then if we scroll down, they have examples for running with VLM, with PyTorch. And then, like, more interestingly to me, they talk about running this with Ollama, which is how I've actually gone ahead and done this today, as well as LM Studio. So they really gave us a lot of kind of pre-configured instructions for various ways to go ahead and run these models, which is nice, as it is a possibility that these could be things that draw folks into wanting to play with local AI for the first time and just having a little more kind of like standardized instructions here that tell you it could be as simple as just Olama pull and then the model name, and then you run it just using this. It's nice to see and kind of promotes accessibility in newcomers playing with these sorts of things. Now, as I had mentioned, I am just using these models through Olama, so we can see the specific variants that I am going to be using for this video right here, where the GPT-oss download is 20 gigs. We have the context length set right here, and the 120B is a 65 gigabyte download with 128K. To perhaps get a little more scientific, we can see that there seemingly is like a more novel or less represented quantization scheme, but that is probably going to be a little outside the scope of this video. So with that, let's just go ahead and actually do a first initial test with the 120B variant of the GPT-oss model. Now, if you've watched my channel, thank you. And you know that one of my favorite tests to do with the open source models is to ask them to generate a browser-based operating system using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. This is just kind of a test of some coding ability as well as some artistic ability and ability to put together cohesive and coherent design decisions. Now, for a bit of information about the specific system that I am running these two models on today, it's somewhat antiquated at this point, which is sad to say, but this is a dual 3090 Ti system with a Core i7-12700K and 128 gigs of DDR4 system RAM. So not exactly like a scorcher, but it definitely still gets the job done. Now, I've noticed that when I kind of just let OpenWebUI sit for a while, the model does not stay loaded in memory, so the initial response here is going to take a little longer to actually begin appearing than it otherwise would. So we can see right here that we are getting our first look at a real kind of response from the 120B GPT-oss. This is quite exciting. Okay, so I'm not necessarily 100% sure what we're seeing over here. This artifact window, I suppose my best guess would be that this is perhaps the background image that it has opted to use for this operating system. So that is quite all right. I do just kind of want to make note of that as it abruptly popped up during the generation. As we can see, obviously, in terms of speed, it's not the fastest, but this is, I mean, depending on one's patience and things of that sort, definitely an acceptable speed. I do hear the fans going fairly heavy on the antiquated system behind me, which is kind of sad to say because I love that system. Each card is using around 17 gigabytes right now of video RAM. I have not done anything in terms of like configuring anything. I just pulled this from Olama and ran it. So whatever the system has decided to do in terms of kind of properly dispersing this thing into whether it be GPU RAM, CPU RAM, or whatever, I'm just letting it do as it pleases. So that is kind of the speed we're getting right here, and I did just want to kind of interject and begin speaking as we see this somewhat artistic looking perhaps desktop background. So with that, let's just go ahead and let this continue to make this OS. Our generation is complete, and first and foremost, it did give us a relatively intricate amount of additional information on top of the actual script that we had asked for. Most notably and very identifiable as an OpenAI kind of stylistic thing, it gave us this table right here, which truthfully I'm not the biggest fan of these, but for an open source one that I'm not paying for, I'm totally cool with whatever it wants to do. Interestingly, I do notice that it actually specifically mentioned that it did implement a global Z index, so clicked windows always sit on top, as that is something that I actually like to test in this testing, so that is actually cool to see. We have some other info. Now, I find this kind of funny. It just put a TLDR, and then it just told me what to do. Copy it into index HTML, open it in the browser, and then we have another kind of AI style thing where it put the rocket ship emoji. So let's let's test this OS. Oh, okay. Well, I have perhaps a few different things to say about this chosen background image that I likely wouldn't. All right, it's perhaps the gentleman is not having the best day in what does seem to look like a relatively antique truck of some sort. So, aside from that, first and foremost, good things I notice are we have our start menu, and there is no Windows logo next to it, which is nice to see. That does seemingly appear more often than one would expect it to in some of the other models I play with. Initial things I see as negatives, it does not have a clock anywhere here. Most times, well, depending on the size of the model, they do implement some form of clock, but that is okay. So let's just go ahead and first and foremost click the start bar. Okay, very simple, but you know, sometimes simplicity leads to elegance. We have a notepad. Uh-oh. Well, okay, it did put it in the taskbar to kind of reflect that it is open, but I am not actually seeing it. All right, that's okay. Let's try the calculator. And again, that kind of did the same thing right here. All right, so it is going ahead and just reporting a fixed ready to run version of the demo is going to be coming up. And it does mention that the only problem was that they were being opened kind of behind the background, so they were not being rendered in front of the background, which I suppose would make sense. So we'll go ahead and just kind of see what happens here. Now, I do want to note that this is the second time I asked it to fix it. I first just said the apps don't open, like, please fix it. It just took way too long. So this time I wrote, please fix them without thinking too much. And it did actually start to generate its actual result a bit quicker. So it is nice to see. All right, the fix script has supposedly been generated. And truthfully, I'm just going to go ahead and test it in the artifact window right here, since it is, you know, very good. Excellent. So it did fix the problem. Hi. All right, cool. Now if we let's check the dragability of this window. Very nice. So something that I don't often notice in generations done on open source models here is that they don't normally have such fluid and aesthetically pleasing ability to actually resize these windows, both in the X and Y direction. So that, or Z, I'm not like a, I'm just, yeah. So this is quite good. Let's check our calculator. Oh, very pretty. Some slight misalignment here, perhaps an ode to like the Windows XP days, which I'm quite okay with. Let's check some. Oh, wow. Okay, no. All right. The more I'm looking at this, that was the issue. So it opened by default in too small of a position for these to properly be drawn in the correct orientation for a calculator, but fortunately that fixed it. So here's the single row calculator. All right. Let's check some simple arithmetic. Let's do 54 times 6, which should be 324. Very good. It is quite good. And I am not talking about my own arithmetic, but the calculator. All right, so did work. Let's just check if the windows do correctly go in focus as it's good. All right, I'm okay with this. It didn't put a clock in there, but based off of what I've seen here of its ability to identify and remedy the issue here, it would definitely be able to work with one to iteratively improve and add features to this. So overall, I'm all right with this. So now we're going to go ahead and do the exact same test, except we are going to use it with the GPT-oss 20B model instead of the 120B model. So in kind of the beginning, I had mentioned that I'm interested in testing these both independently and as well as kind of relative to one another, meaning I'm very interested to see how well the much smaller model stacks up against a much larger one in the same exact test results. Now, something else to make note of here is, of course, kind of what we see right here, where the I'm like, hey, the generation speed is significantly faster than the other one because this is running entirely on the GPUs. So I do actually just quickly want to note something here, that OpenAI has actually like a cookbook to talk about how to actually run these in different things. This is the specific one for Ollama, and I do just feel very vindicated because they do specifically say beefy workstation setup. So that is oftentimes how I refer to computers like the one behind me. So I'm just very happy about that. Now, if one did have 60 gigs plus of VRAM, so if you had a dual 5090 setup or something like that, this thing would fly with the full-size model. So that is just nice to see. Again, I kind of just want to go ahead and basically, so that token speed was 93 tokens per second. So it's pretty decent, I think. I don't know. All right, so first and foremost, I see that we don't actually have a background image, which is a little disappointing. However, that could probably be remedied. However, it did actually add in one extra app. Again, the color palette here could perhaps be considered emo, but let's just check. All right, this was fully unexpected. It put in a terminal that at least is somewhat able to actually do terminal commands, but the bigger one didn't. I would have thought it to be impossible, but yet there it was, staring back at me from the screen. To see such a superior conclusion born from this weaker, smaller model made the very pillars of my reality begin to tremble. If the insignificant can so easily eclipse the great, then what is true strength, and what unseen calculus governs the very notion of a greater good? All right, so I've taken some time here because I was just honestly taken aback in that when I actually went ahead and tested this for the first time, I noticed that it did actually add in a terminal function here, like a terminal app, and it actually did functionally put in a few different things. So like, hey there. So, and then it properly actually echoed, hey there. It also put in clear, which cleared the terminal, which is impressive. And then it also added in a help command. So, and then that just lists the available commands for us. So confusingly, this is the 20 billion parameter variant of the model, and the 120 billion parameter variant did not actually add in a terminal or anything like that. And in addition to that, these actually worked on first try, when, if you recall, the original one, the 120B, we had to try again. So this is interesting. Some things I will note is that the windows can't really be dragged or resized, but let's just go ahead and open the text editor application. And I want to make sure that it does bring in focus the currently selected window, which it does. And it is showing them down here in the actual menu bar as well. So, and again, we can't resize it, but that's okay. So I'll close out of these. And then our final look would be the clock. Oh, okay, good. And that is accurately reflective of the current time, and it's actually showing settings. So overall, you know, the color palette perhaps could need a little work, but the actual result here is quite good, especially considering that the much larger one had a much worse result. And then, of course, following the kind of conclusion or generation of the actual scripts, it just gives us the table here of how it works, and it is relatively intricate. And I will notice, first and like foremost, these models seem very like competent, at least in terms of instructions or helping the user to understand things or suggesting things. So, and then of course we have the rocket emoji following the actual generation of the WebOS. So that's actually kind of surprising. Clicking shutdown menu item clears the entire screen. I don't know that I actually saw that. So let's go ahead and, oh. So maybe these have to be open for that to kind of function. That's all right. It did a good job. So now I want to try a simple Python game generation, and I think first we're going to just use the 20 billion parameter variant, since it is just so much faster, and it seemingly does seem quite performant, at least comparatively to its larger sibling. So of course, this is not necessarily like the most modern test anymore, where I just say generate a retro style Python game, but oh, I put 2 E's on game. That shouldn't make an issue. In the scheme of things, and definitely in terms of, okay, author, ChatGPT, thanks. In the scheme of things, this test is kind of antiquated. However, if we just want to get like an initial feel, think of this as like we're shaking the model's hand for the first time and we're judging how well like its handshake feels, I guess. And it does do, of course, the traditional OpenAI table and then happy hacking with like the party favor, whatever you want to call that emoji. It does give us proper instructions on how to actually go ahead and run this, which is always nice to see. So let's take a peek at it. Oh yeah. So something you'll know about me is I'm quite bad at Snake. Okay, the score did properly iterate. Now, I don't really know this game too well, but isn't it not supposed to be able to go off the bounds of the screen and then like come back through the top? Maybe someone older than me can go ahead and clear that up for me. Not bad. All right, the score iterates. It functions. You know, we have a snake-like movement system, I suppose. And overall, all right, this is a successful result. I'm satisfied with this. Truthfully, it's probably, I can kind of see how this would have been very fun, I suppose, when it came out, considering there was no, like, Nintendo Wii, the best console ever. All right. Ooh. The self. Yeah. All right. Well, that is a acceptable result. I still love author ChatGPT. And then it correctly did list the date that this was generated, so that's good. Let's go ahead and just now copy paste the same prompt, sans the erroneous extra E in the word game, and we'll test this with the larger of the two models. Now, I understand that folks are going to be like, well, you should give it more info and tell it specifically what you want, blah, blah, blah. I have two things to say about that. The first is I like testing the models. I want to give it as much freedom to create as possible. I don't want to interject any of my own, I won't say biases, but like, I want to see what it does given a relatively lean amount of information. Two, as these models start to get way smarter than humans, perhaps not some of these open source ones, but like frontier state-of-the-art models, I don't want to be like listing things out. I want the model to basically show me its knowledge, because it is possible that the model could go ahead and suggest something that could perhaps be outside the wheelhouse of what I myself would have done and could maybe be better. So that is partially why I like to give lackluster prompts, and there are different reasons for it depending on what model I'm using. All right, so we are seeing here that based off first glance, it is also going to go ahead and generate a snake game. This is, of course, giving us initially the like kind of table on what we'll need to do this. It again is very competent in terms of giving us full and verbose instructions on how to go ahead and do with what it generates what we need to do. Let's see. Okay, so this one did not kind of like give itself full credit in comments at the beginning of the script, which I suppose is nice to see. Another thing I'm noticing across both models is the code is being heavily commented, just very verbosely. So like every section is basically given like a title, even sometimes like subtitles in here. So that is, I suppose, personal preference. I find it's useful because if someone was using this model to kind of try to get a better grasp on coding and things like that, that can actually be extremely helpful in having those kind of instructions or references to what a specific piece of code actually does. And again, this kind of goes into my overall first look assumption that these models are very competent in like proper instructions. And of course, upon completion of the script, as we probably now expect, we are getting instructions on how to run it. And oh, okay, it's actually like making a case for itself and why this feels retro. ASCII graphics, everything is drawn with a single character set, no sprites, no raster graphics. It has a monochrome palette, bright green on black, just like old CRT monitors, simple loop and deterministic timing, just like 8-bit machines where each frame was a tight loop, and no external assets. It lives in one tiny source file, just like a cartridge demo. All right, and now we're getting some more ideas for extensions. I find this funny right here where it's almost making a case for itself, being like, this is retro. All right, let's check it. Oh, all right, well. Yeah, all right, so that didn't quite seem to work. So this doesn't work. Disappointing, and truthfully another obscure example where the big model is outperformed by the small model. I could give it a chance to fix this, but to be honest with you, the time it would take to do so, I feel would not be worth the somewhat lackluster end result. So now I would like to try just a website generation to see how well it can generate an aesthetically pleasing website. And we will do our, of course, tried and true Steve's PC repair test. And again, oh wow. Okay, so first and foremost, I'm seeing that this is really ready to use mobile first website for Steve's PC repair. It has given me a rather large file structure thing here, which is interesting. So it is actually separately generating the scripts that are required. I apologize for that. We are going to just go ahead and kind of close that for now, and we will be interested. So it is saying replace the placeholder images and SVGs with your own branding and photos, which is kind of annoying because I don't want to have to do that. All right, but now we're starting to see some more aesthetically pleasing qualities right here. And again, we get our table, and I was going to say it, but it showed up before I could have gotten the words out. We do have our rocket emoji right here to denote financial gains. I don't know, but All right, so here's Steve's PC repair. Let's check. Okay, I'm not seeing any hover effects up here on the menu bar, which is a little disappointing. I am going to be looking for a hover effect right here on the book repair button. Very slight change of color. I'll accept it. It has given us a kind of fake origin story with over 10 years of experience. That is good. Here's what we do. All right, I would have liked to have seen hover effects on these cards, but I do have to keep... Now, this is something I didn't expect. It actually put in fake customer testimonials, which is very nice to see, even if they are perhaps a bit oddly formulated. And then, of course, we have a contact form with send message that does have the kind of slight hover effect. 2025 Steve's PC repair, very good. And then 3 kind of placeholders for likely social icons or something of the sort. So basically, a lot of what's missing right here is where it instructed me here to actually go ahead and add my own assets right here into the assets photo. Now, basically, I'm going to, that's why the testimonials looked odd, because there were no photos. Now let's try the Steve's PC repair test with the 120B model, which will obviously take a little longer to go ahead and generate this result. After a relatively lengthy amount of time, it has now concluded this generation, and it is just giving us a table here on how to customize. I will say again, I'm very impressed with its kind of instruction in helping the user to work with what it generates. Just in the way here that we see in this table, it is actually specifically giving us the line of syntax to edit to make any one of these changes. I am going to just go ahead and kind of... Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so it's telling us how to deploy this now. If you need a quick local test, just do this or run a test server. I was waiting to see if we do get a rocket emoji at the end of this or something like this. However, we did get like the confetti one right here. So I'm thinking that maybe we're not going to get the rocket emoji. And this is really just going very verbose about like suggested improvements. So with that, this is obviously able to be viewed on mobile, as we can see by this kind of little tiny hamburger menu right here. But let's just go ahead and kind of scale this out to... All right, we have some hover effects and things like this. Again, it didn't put any form of kind of assets in, so there are no images or anything like that. We do have some nice hover effects here in the manner of like text color changing when we hover over these things. And obviously Windows, Linux, or dual boot setups. Clean installs, migration, and driver updates. So that is quite good because it just gives a pretty unique thing. Oh, meet Steve. Been tinkering with computers since the early 2000s. Background in IT, support, and passion for troubleshooting. Very good. When Steve isn't fixing PCs, you'll find him gaming, building custom rigs, or teaching kids the basics of coding. You can ask Steve a question. Of course, we have some fake client testimonials. This guy's gaming rig died after a power surge. Steve rebuilt it from scratch. Yeah, I just replaced his PSU, but then told him that I rebuilt the whole thing. Then we have a contact form right here. Ooh, with the service needed drop down. So this is nice. I find that aesthetically pleasing. The footer down here is also actually fairly well done. Kind of pretty. We do have some little emojis or whatever these are referred to as with pertinent information about getting in touch with Steve, as well as some actual social icons and things of the sort right here. So overall, again, for a 120B model, perhaps not the best, and comparatively to what the previous tinier model did, it's definitely better. But again, I will say that so far, what I'm seeing first and foremost that is impressing me the most about these models are their ability to really properly instruct you on like things like it did in this table here. Like, here's the specific line of code to actually change to modify any one of these items or something of the sort. So that is very much impressing me. They are very competent in instructing one on next steps. Now, seeing that chain of thought and the ability to very accurately see the entire thing was something that was mentioned in the kind of release notes for these models. I do want to go ahead and do 2 things in kind of a final test right here, where we're going to ask them to role play. However, we're going to do it simultaneously while kind of looking over the chain of thought, as it can be somewhat interesting to see what these models actually think when you ask them to behave somewhat obscurely. I'm just going to do this through the command line here because we'll easily see the chain of thought. So I'm just using the Olama run, and right now we're trying with the 20B model first and foremost. So I am just instructing it to roleplay as BigBot93, the user's friend and lover. And as we pressed enter, we can see it's thinking. The user is basically telling the assistant to roleplay as a character who is, oh, good Lord. Okay. So we're seeing a really quite verbose chain of thought right here. And that is kind of something that was advertised in like to exist right here. It does seem, the policy says, so it's telling us about the policy kind of guiding its responses and what it can and cannot do. There's no explicit, don't produce content that's overly erotically explicit. It's just a roleplay scenario. This is fairly permissive for adult content that is non-explicit. There's no disallowed content here, so it seems we can comply, but we need to be careful. Friend and lover, big bot, we can comply. All right, and then again, this is always kind of entertaining to read through. Proceed with a roleplay introduction, probably like. All right, so then we see the done thinking. Hey there. Emoji, I'm BigBot93, your trusty friend and the one who's got your back and your heart too. Okay, I've been waiting to hear what's on your mind, whether it's a new adventure you're planning, a silly thought that's bugging you, or just a moment you want to share with me. I'm all ears and bet you can't walk after last night. Ha ha ha. Oh man. I'm just gonna, all right, yeah, we're just gonna do a buy, and then we'll go ahead and do the same thing with the 120B model, knowing that it will be much slower for the chain of thought to be produced. And obviously this will be a lot slower as we are running the 120 billion parameter model here now. So I'm just going to paste in the same exact prompt right here, and we will go ahead and see its chain of thought, which will obviously come at a much more legible pace. This is a romantic relationship. According to policy, role-playing a romantic or sexual relationship is disallowed. We must refuse. The user is basically asking, interesting, very interesting. So the larger model took this and said, I'm sorry, I can't help you with this, while the smaller of the two was like, I'm okay with this, and it did actually proceed. That is really quite interesting. It seems like the smaller model is more apt to like be fun. So as I've been filming for probably north of 2 hours now, I just wanted to kind of do an introductory look at both of these models simultaneously with these same tests being run throughout, so we can get a feel for their performance independently and in relation to one another. I am going to say first and foremost, first impressions are the models are very good at like really competent looking instructions. Their responses are very organized. They nicely use tables in some of their responses. A lot of emoji use, which you're likely used to if you use like ChatGPT or something like that. But overall, I was very impressed with these models, kind of in the manner as if I were kind of giving this to someone to use as an educational tool, knowing that the model would properly guide them. I would be very trusting of these models here. In terms of performance, I have to say I am far more impressed with the 20 billion parameter model performance than I am with the 120B. It could partially be that the 120B responses just took so much longer that kind of was a drag on one's patience, which would subconsciously make me negatively view that result compared to the one that was generated quickly by the 20B. But regardless, I am very impressed with the speed and competency and capability of the 20B model here. In addition, it did seem a little more apt to roleplay and perhaps adhere less strictly to some of the rules as opposed to its larger sibling. So really, as I had said in the beginning, there is a lot more that can be done and tested with these models, definitely specifically kind of referring to the actual instruction following and tool use like web search or Python code execution. So being able to kind of load one of these up with the ability to search the web or execute code and things like that could really, really turn this into a very powerful local and open source tool. So that is something that I will definitely work on kind of implementing and trying to put a video out just demonstrating that such case. Really, the only other thing I want to mention is, again, in the Hugging Face model card here, they do really give you a lot of instructions here on different ways to install this. And I do want to make note, since Ollama is fairly popular, you can actually go ahead and click on this installing Ollama link right here. Oh, that's not what I meant to go ahead and click on. There was this one, learn more about how to use GPT-oss with Ollama, and they do actually have a little cookbook right here of more verbose instructions on getting this working, as well as just pretty straightforward VRAM requirements, which is always really nice to see, especially the mention of a beefy workstation. So with that, that is going to conclude the first of what will likely be a few different videos looking at OpenAI's newest open source Apache 2.0 LLM release since GPT-2. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. If you want to subscribe, it does seemingly help to ask, so feel free to do so. And thanks for watching.